Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargava, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about how the United States views India's relationship with Russia. We will also talk about the recent fuel price hike. But first, we talk about the Common University Entrance Test. For many years, the cutoffs for college admissions had been breaking records. From 98, 99 to finally many colleges admitting students only when they have 100% marks, at least initially. This was especially the case with the Delhi University colleges. But now, all this is set to change. And this is because instead of relying on the results of the Class 12 board examination, all central universities will now rely on a common entrance test. In this segment, Indian Express's Sourav Roy Barman joins us to talk about what this will involve, why this decision has been taken, and how it will impact students. So, Sourav, the criteria for admission in central universities is set to change with the introduction of a common entrance test. Is this system completely new to central universities?
Well, it's not entirely correct because way back in 2010, the UPA government had launched the Central Universities Common Entrance Test. And since then, over the last decade, around 14 central universities have adopted a common test. But major central universities like Delhi University, say AMU, the Aligarh Muslim University, or the Jamia Millia Islamia University in New Delhi, they haven't really moved to that system. And the government has been pushing for a common test for quite some time now. Finally, from the next academic session, which is the academic session 22-23, all the 45 central universities will start admitting students through common test.
And what is the reason that this is being done now?
See, this is mostly aimed at addressing the problem which Delhi University has been facing over the last few years, where you have seen cutoffs reaching unrealistic levels. So that is primarily the issue that the authorities, the UGC, is trying to address through this particular mechanism.
In fact, one reason for high cutoffs in DU especially was that students were scoring really high marks in their board examinations, right? So could you give us a broad picture of how this affected admissions?
For that, you have to keep in mind that the board exam scores of our students are not really standardized. When you look at CBSE or other state boards, there is a huge disparity. So due to that, a very few minuscule percentage of CBSE students and certain state board students, they were cornering disproportionate number of seats in DU. For example, the Indian Express actually had a story recently. So I'll give you numbers of 2021. So in 2021, as much as 66% undergraduate admissions in DU went to students who scored more than 90%. And if you zoom in, you'll see that almost 40% of the students of the admissions were of students who scored more than 95%. So you see there's a huge problem there. A lot of students are left out.
So this essentially means that if someone is part of a board that does lenient marking, then they have a higher chance of being admitted to Delhi University, for example.
Yeah, somehow I'm at an advantageous position if I'm enrolled in a certain board.
Okay, so with the introduction of the Common University Entrance Test, what will the admission system look like now?
So the UGC chairperson, Jagdish Kumar, he made it very clear on Monday that your board exam scores will have no weightage at all in your undergraduate admission in any central university from the next academic session. So your admission will be solely based on your marks, the marks that you score in the proposed entrance.
So based on what you're saying, this will make the Class 12 board examinations considerably less important and students will not take them seriously.
That is one perception of the entire development. But the UGC authorities believe that since the syllabi of the entrance will be drawn up based on your school's NCERT syllabus, so it will not really make boards or whatever you study in school redundant. It will continue to hold value because whatever you're going to write in the entrance will be based on what you study in school.
Okay, so apart from the fact that the CUET will be based on the Class 12 syllabus and the NCERT curriculum, what else do we know about this test? What else will it include?
So we don't have the guidelines yet. So far, the UGC has put out a notice saying that the entrance will be rolled out from the next academic session, and it is likely to be held in the first week of July. It will be a computer-based test, which will be held in 13 languages: Hindi, Marathi, Gujarati, Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, Malayalam, Urdu, Assamese, Bengali, Punjabi, Odia, and English. And the applicants can start applying. They will open the window in the first week of April. But we also know that it will be a 3-part exam. The first part will test the candidates' language skills, comprehension skills. It will have questions on vocabulary, synonyms, and antonyms, besides other things. And second part will test the candidate's domain-specific knowledge. So when I talk about domain-specific knowledge, essentially a candidate can choose from 27 different domains. 27 domains are essentially subjects, and one candidate can pick up to 6 subjects. I mean, you have subjects ranging from accountancy to biotech, to chemistry, to computer science, mathematics, political science, mass communication, etc., etc. And the third part will be a general test where your general knowledge, current affairs knowledge, numerical ability, your reasoning, your logical and analytical reasoning, all these things will be assessed. These are the things we know so far. But we will know more once the UGC issues the guidelines on the exam pattern.
And Saurav, what kind of reactions have we seen regarding this decision by the students, the universities, and even schools?
From what we have seen in Delhi University, the way various teachers' bodies have reacted, it is a mixed reaction that we have so far. And the criticism that the announcement has drawn is essentially on the fact that another entrance will basically end up encouraging coaching industry. I mean, even in the case of joint entrance exams, in case of engineering, the argument that was offered was that since the syllabi of the entrance is based on your school syllabi, so it will not really put a student who is not take coaching at a disadvantageous position. But over the years, we have seen how the coaching industry has flourished across the country. So there are fears, there are apprehensions that we can see something similar playing out in the coming years. But then the UGC reasons that in case of, say, IIT entrance, there are a very limited number of seats and vis-a-vis the number of applicants. Whereas in the case of this particular proposed test, you have as many as 45 universities with a huge number of seats at offer. But then the other argument is that some universities draw a lot more demand compared to others.
Also, right now we are talking about central universities, but would other universities like private or state universities also look at adopting this system?
So that is something the UGC wants to happen, but they haven't really made it mandatory for other universities, say state universities or private universities, to admit students based on CUET. So far it is voluntary and they are free to do so. But in case of central universities, they have made it very clear that it is mandatory.
And next we talk about the crisis in Ukraine. Today, the 24th of March marks the 30th day of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So far, more than 950 civilians have died in the war, including at least 76 children, according to the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Now, while many countries, including the US and Australia, have condemned Russia's action, India so far has refrained from doing so, though it has called for a peaceful resolution of the crisis. As we have mentioned in previous episodes, New Delhi has been walking on a tight diplomatic rope, considering its historic relations with Russia and its dependence on Russian oil and defense equipment. Earlier this week, US President Joe Biden had been talking about Russia and Vladimir Putin's aggression when he talked about the Quad, which is a strategic grouping between the US, Australia, Japan, and India. And he said that among these countries, India is a bit shaky in terms of showing support against the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
In response to his aggression, we presented a united front throughout NATO and in the Pacific. The Quad is, with the possible exception of India being somewhat shaky on some of this, but Japan has been extremely strong, so has Australia.
In this segment, Indian Express's associate editor Shubhajit Roy joins us to talk about the significance of this statement and how the US sees India's position. Shubhajit, how should we look at President Biden's statement here? Is it a sign that the US is putting a bit of pressure on India to change its stance, or is it just an acknowledgement of India's position?
I think it's a bit of both, but more importantly, it actually shows US's assessment of where India stands when it comes to its Quad partner countries. As you know, the Australian Prime Minister was speaking at the virtual summit with Prime Minister Modi, where he criticized the Russian aggression. I mean, calling it unlawful aggression and all of that. And the Japanese Prime Minister, Fumio Kishida, who was also in town, he had also called it a serious development that has shaken the foundation of international order. Now, this Biden's comment comes right after these two comments by the Australian and the Japanese prime ministers, where he was addressing a CEO roundtable in Washington, where he said that, the Quad is, with the possible exception of India, being somewhat shaky on this issue of how this aggression has been condemned. So that has been the US assessment. That's what we can make out of. If you remember last month or early this month, actually, there was a cable by the US State Department, which was later recalled, but has never been denied. That cable was sent to the American diplomats that had instructed them to inform their counterparts from India that their position of neutrality on Ukraine put them in Russia's camp. Now, that particular cable was obviously recalled, that is not shared with the Indian counterparts, but this come out, there has been no denial of its presence. So that tells you that there is a sense of unease or disquiet in Washington about India's position. But so far, no one has come out condemning India for this, and none of the, at least, US government officials, although there have been statements that people should see where they stand in the history books. But apart from that, there has been no real condemnation. So I guess President Biden was articulating what was Washington's assessment of India's position.
In fact, you, in an exclusive interview, had spoken to Victoria Nuland, who is the US Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, and you had asked her about this statement. What did she have to say about it?
Yeah, that was an interview which I did, and it was in fact my last question to her in the interview, and I asked her that, is that a correct, a fair characterization? And she said that I think India comes from a different historical context and is making its own evolution from a different starting point than where US is. And she said that for President Biden and for the US administration, which has worked so hard early in the term to have a stable and predictable relationship with Russia, it's really jarring, painful, and awful to see the course that Putin has taken. So she was diplomatic, and that's what was expected of the US Foreign Secretary. Essentially, Undersecretary for Political Affairs is the equivalent of India's Foreign Secretary. So she said that, that's why having these conversations, which she had with Harshvardhan Shringla, the Indian Foreign Secretary, and External Affairs Minister S. Shankar, conversations that they were having and their impact is important for India and the US to work together.
And in this interview, a major highlight was also her mentioning China helping Russia. Could you talk about what she said regarding that?
Yeah, I think the broad point that she tried to make was that she was framing the Russia-China alliance over Ukraine as a debate between democracies and autocracies. And this tightening of alignment between Russia and China, where Russia is now seeking out help from China, looking for money, even looking for weapons. So that she said that it was worrying. And also the fact that both the autocracies are tightening the relationship to break the rules of the international system. And that was something she talked about in great detail in her interview. And I think to me that stood out as one of the most important points in our interview.
Russia is now seeking out help from China in this war. They're looking for money, and they're even looking for weapons. And so that is tightening the alignment between Russia and China, which isn't good for us, it isn't good for India. So,
So you worry about that?
We are absolutely worried about that. we're also worried about, President Putin has made loose statements about chemical and biological weapons, even about nuclear weapons. So it is very important in this context.
Okay, so if that is the case, what does it mean for India? How worried should we be about this alignment, especially considering that India-China tensions in eastern Ladakh are still going on?
Exactly. In fact, I asked her about this. The Chinese vice foreign minister had drawn a parallel between NATO's eastward expansion in Europe and the Quad in the Indo-Pacific. So she said very clearly that obviously China is trying to seek an advantage for itself in this conflict. And what threatens China most is open and free societies. So, in fact, one of the things that I had asked her was, does that divert the attention of the Quad or the Indo-Pacific away to the Russian crisis, to the Russia-Ukraine crisis? She said, in fact, to the contrary, it deepens the cooperation, because what does Indo-Pacific actually stand for? I mean, the Indo-Pacific strategy is all about free, open, prosperous Indo-Pacific. And what we are fighting for in the Russian-Ukraine context, which she said was the right to be a free, open, and prosperous society. So essentially, she said that what we are trying to do as democracies is ensure that the democratic way of life, the rule of international law, human rights, of sovereignty, and territorial integrity of countries, non-coercion, all these fundamental principles and values which are shared, whether they are in the Indo-Pacific or whether it's in Europe, they should prevail. And I remember the line that she said that, that our kids get to live in that kind of a world. So I think that's what she tried to convey. And that, to my mind, is an important takeaway from the visit, which she tried to convey in her conversations to her interlocutors, and try to give a message that India should stand firm on principles, whether when it comes to China or when it comes to Russia.
And in the end, we talk about oil prices. On Tuesday, for the first time in 4 months, oil marketing companies increased prices for both diesel and petrol by about 0.8 rupees per litre. And prices for both the fuels are expected to increase further. To talk about how much they are expected to increase and the reasons for it, Indian Express's Karunjit Singh joins us. So, Karunjit, what is the reason that we are now seeing fuel prices rise after a gap of about 4 months?
So the reason why the prices were not increased through all this time, even though we've seen a large increase in crude oil prices, is actually not been stated by the government or oil marketing companies. But it has become a practice amongst oil marketing companies to freeze prices, especially when they're tending to move upwards just before important state elections. We also saw this last year. And on November 4th, after the government announced a cut in excise duty on both petrol and diesel, oil marketing companies halted their price hikes. Subsequently, we've seen the price of crude oil rise significantly, but the prices of petrol and diesel for retail customers have stayed the same.
And the hunch is that the government doesn't want people to be annoyed or angry regarding oil prices when they're about to cast their votes.
Yes, definitely. This is what we hear from analysts as well, that something that we were expecting, that the prices would be hiked again after the elections. But this time it has been actually quite a large difference in what we would expect the prices to be given current crude oil prices and the prices at pumps. In fact, one key indicator is the fact that oil marketing companies have actually increased the prices of diesel for bulk customers sharply just on Sunday by about 25 rupees. So bulk diesel prices, which are applicable to large consumers, let's say like housing societies, malls, factories that use diesel for gensets, they are now paying in Mumbai about 122 rupees per litre as against 96 per litre for the common customer. So that indicates that there's a lot of price hikes that we can expect going forward, because there's a big gap between what the OMCs should be charging given their traditional marketing margins and what they are charging at retail points right now.
And Karunjit, how much more are fuel prices expected to go up?
So, oil marketing companies have hiked prices by about 1.6 rupees already across India. What we should expect to see is significant hikes going forward for some time still, because since the last time petrol and diesel prices were revised, we have seen an increase of about $30 to $35 in the price of Brent crude being the most important component in the price of petroleum products. And experts tell us that to maintain marketing margins, oil marketing companies have to increase the price of both petrol and diesel by about half a rupee for every dollar increase in the price of Brent crude. So what we're looking at is a 15 to 17 rupee increase in the price of both products. Now, one of the factors that might actually help potentially not bring the prices to these levels where they're up by 15 to 17 rupees is the fact that oil marketing companies are also refiners, and they have been making slightly more money from the refining process as refining cracks, or the difference in the price between crude oil and petroleum products has gone up internationally. So their refining margins have gone up. Another way out for maybe not having prices increase to this extent would be the government actually cutting excise duties further. Now, despite the cut announced in November, excise duties on both petrol and diesel are still above pre-pandemic levels. The excise duty on petrol is above pre-pandemic levels by about rupees 6 per litre, and on diesel it's up by about rupees 8 per litre compared to pre-pandemic levels. These were increased to raise revenues when the government was actually expecting a great shortfall in revenues as there was a lockdown and far lower economic activity. So these are two ways in which prices might not come up as much as 15 to 17 rupees. But in general, we would expect a series of increases going forward for some time now.
You were listening to Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargava, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.